Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. Thank you so much for being part of our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Sherrie Barch. She is here to celebrate her debut middle grade novel, Heaven's Bell. Before we invite Sherrie into the studio, you may remember that not too long ago we announced that Sherrie Barch's Heaven's Bell is a Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read. Our panel really loved this book. They love the friendship, the deep, deep friendship that is found in this book, and they love the way that the book talks about a very, very serious topic. We held a book giveaway for Heaven's Bell, and we wanted to let you know we do have a winner of that book giveaway. Is Christina Stagg in Wisconsin. Yeah, Christina Stagg, she liked our post on Twitter and shared it. That's the way you enter our book giveaways. You just like our posts on social media. It's on Twitter, it's at Jedley Magic. On Facebook, it's facebook.com/readingwithyourkids and at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram. On any of those platforms, all you need to do is to like our post. You get extra credit if you share it. All those entries go into a hat. We pull the name out of the hat. And this week, we pulled Christina Stagg's name to win her copy of Heaven's Bell. It's on the way, Christina. Hope you love this Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read. Joining us right now from right outside of Rockford in the state of Illinois. I'm really excited. Our guest today is here to celebrate her middle grade novel. It's called Heaven's Bell. Please welcome to the show, Sherrie Barch. Sherrie, welcome to the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here.
I'm really excited to have you on here. Tell us about Heaven's Bell.
Well, Heaven's Bell is a story about two middle school best friends, and one of them unfortunately gets ill and goes to heaven. And it is a story about what he experiences in heaven and what she experiences here on earth and how they meet again.
Ooh, talk about intriguing. I hope that's on the back of your book, because I'm like a fish. I'm hooked. This is great. And I'm imagining, all sorts of conversations that can come from this. Obviously, the most obvious one is, teenagers, tweens, death. We shouldn't be talking to our tweens about that. But the reality is they're experiencing it.
Exactly. And that is, I really call it my COVID passion project. It is my first book. I am barely identifying as an author. And I was so moved and I think so concerned about how so many people with COVID were dying alone and in the hospital. And even our traditional ways of mourning were being taken away from us with, not being able to have traditional funerals, not being able to give hugs maybe to family members that lost someone. And what made me really want to push this story out was it creates a platform to have that conversation. So when you read the book, it's a simple story. It's one that I told verbally only maybe 3 times, but it had real lasting impact on the people that I told it to. And then years later, they would come back and tell me about it. So I thought if I put it out there in writing and parents and children could read it, when they're done, I think what I'm getting in feedback is that the story is eliciting the the memories of the loved ones, not necessarily talking about the story. I remember a time when, but you know, it's been a journey, and I am so blessed by the stories that are coming back to me after people read this story, where they're able to talk about death, and they're able to talk about how much they loved their neighbor or their grandpa or their friend, especially now.
Yeah. Boy, so much to talk about. You know, you mentioned early on, you know, COVID, and it's changed the way that we've experienced grief and loss and death. Very early on in the pandemic, we host international kids here, and we've had kids live with us from all over the world. And, you know, when the pandemic first started, our kids in China were messaging us, and please wear masks. Well, we don't have any masks here, but we'll be okay. And then suddenly we received a box full of masks from our Chinese kids. And one of our kids from Italy is a doctor. She had just graduated, just became a doctor right when the pandemic hit in Milan. And she was sending me messages about, you know, the fact that it was so difficult. They were so exhausted. They were working these, you know, just 24-hour shifts. And it was so sad because so many people were dying, and they were dying alone.
Yes.
And that was the thing that hit her so much, that they were dying alone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And how do you create that closure? I even had a couple individuals that gave me feedback that were healthcare providers. And so they actually used Heaven's Bell to help explain what they were doing as a nurse or as a doctor, and, you know, helping say goodbye and being there at the bedside for these patients that were saying goodbye to their families, and the stress that created. And so being able to explain to their children why they have to be there and why they have to be away. And then some losing their own family members and what that looks like. So it really is a platform that can be applied in so many different ways.
Yeah. You mentioned you're getting a lot of feedback. You just shared a little bit of the feedback that you've heard from folks in the medical field. What other kind of feedback have you heard from folks who've read Heaven's Bell?
Well, one that really sticks with me is I had someone tell me that their mom died when they were younger, and she had two girls, and she had never been able to really talk about her mom to her daughters, because every time she thought about it, she became really sad. And what she didn't want to do is make her children see her being sad when she was trying to talk about memories of her mother. And she said after she read Heaven's Bell, it changed her perspective completely. And it allowed her to sit down with her children and talk about her mother very peacefully, and explain to her daughters what an amazing woman her mother was, and be able to keep her memory alive. So she said Heaven's Bell took her from this really sad place to understanding maybe one story of what it might be like for the loved ones that we've lost, and what's going on in heaven. And that really moved me, because here we gave the gift of these two daughters getting to know the beautiful memories of their grandma.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if this is a worldwide thing, but it is true. There are so many parents out there, it was especially true when I was a kid about 100 years ago, that, you know, families didn't talk about death, especially with their kids. And parents worked really, really hard to not let their kids see them be sad. And I think that's kind of sad, because grief is part of life.
Right.
And we should be able to let our kids see us. We don't want our kids to see us when we're out of our mind angry, but definitely and unfortunately sometimes they see us when we're out of our mind angry. But we absolutely need to be able to let our kids know when we're sad, because we're going to be sad, and they're going to be sad, and they need to learn how to process that. And
even just to create a safe place to talk about their feelings. And so the beginning of the book has a letter to parents. And like I had mentioned earlier, I told the story 3 different times just verbally. And COVID made me write it down and get it out there. And if it helps even one person, it's worth it. And what happened is in the letter to the parents, I wrote it in a way that a child could read it too. Mm. Because then, especially with, 8 to 12 years old, they understand what's going on. So the letter to the parents talks a little bit about, hey, your tweener, might be quiet or might not want to talk about it, and that's okay. But the tweener can also read that and say, okay, this is something that, my parents, now we have an understanding, and I can reference maybe some of the things that Sherrie's talking about in that letter to parents. Yeah. And then the story itself creates that opportunity to say, well, what did you think of the story? The last time I told the story was to my niece, and she had lost her grandmother. It was my brother and sister-in-law. And she was probably 8 or 9 years old, and she was really, really quiet. And my brother and sister-in-law were concerned that she was really quiet and not, and this was pre-COVID a while ago. She's, 18 now. And so I told a story verbally to her about Heaven's Bell. And I said, what do you think? Here's my vision of what heaven is. And again, it's spiritual, but it's not religious, by the way. I mean, I say Heaven's Bell, but it really is a very, non-religious story. I don't even think I mentioned God in it. And so she basically listened to the story. And then when I asked her about her grandmother and said, what do you think she's doing right now? She told me a story. She told me this 5-minute story about what her grandmother's doing in heaven, and she's riding a horse, and she has brown hair, and her body doesn't hurt her anymore, and she's smiling, and she's laughing, and she's saying everything's going to be okay, and I'll see you soon. Take your time.
Sharing that story with me, it just brings back a memory. I was interviewing an author this morning who wrote a book. My grandma has dementia. And that was bringing back memories of my mom when she was suffering with Parkinson's and dementia. And my daughter, it was especially hard for her. I think she was 14 or 15 at the time. And I know when my mom finally passed, my daughter came to me and said, well, this is good because now I can talk to Grammy again.
Oh.
Because she hadn't been able to because, my mom just didn't remember anyone.
Yes.
And so that, that memory that you just shared of the conversation with your niece reminded me of that moment.
It's really been amazing. I don't know what I expected, but I am blown away by the willingness for people to talk about their loved ones. And it's not just about people that have just passed. Mm-hmm. I mean, people are, like I told you in the story, people are going way back and able to think through it. I even had one mom whose mother was going in for some pretty serious surgery and really didn't have a good prognosis. And ended up reading the story with her children, and just the mom's still around, and everything is is okay. But there's a preparedness there too. Mm-hmm. So I'm really just grateful that people are sharing their stories with me, and that there's ways in which the story is helping people that I didn't even think of in writing it.
Yeah. Now, I'm really curious. Now, I shared with you before we started recording that I travel around doing educational magic shows, and so I'm telling stories on stage. And my first children's book, The Great Maritini, was based on a story that I had been telling on stage for years. So it makes sense that I was writing and sharing these stories. But Heaven's Bell was written many years after you had created this story, and were telling it orally. Where did that come from? I mean, what circumstances that were created that made you, number one, come up with the story and then start sharing it and telling it orally?
Yeah, I don't think I'm real good with death and dying, to be honest. So I think it's a little funny that here's my book about death and dying. I'm not an expert. And I think for me, I've had this story in my head since I was a child. And I think it was my way of coping and keeping people alive in my mind. So at Christmas or, just when I think of people, I'm in my mind's eye, I'm ringing their bell and they know I'm thinking about them. And everyone has that special sound that their bell makes when Sherrie thinks of them. And sometimes it could just be a neighbor that maybe passed or somebody that I haven't seen in a long time, or I try to keep their spirit alive. And then I think when I had a couple loved ones that passed and I felt safe and secure to tell the story. But then I think COVID, I think it really is upsetting to me that so many people were dying, and it's such, across the whole world. And then when they were alone and they're doing funerals in parking lots and I thought I have to get this story out if it helps people, let alone the tweener. You have parents that are coping. You had books for really small children, picture books and things. But this is a book that really is geared toward pretty strong, significant discussions, because they know death is permanent at this age, and they're conscientious enough that they don't want to add to the burden or the pain or the sorrow in their family or their parents. So they kind of fade. And I thought, well, Heaven's Bell is going to be an opportunity that they could read a story, the parents could read the story, or the grandparent. And you never even have to talk about the story. But I bet you could approach a memory in a way that is more peaceful when you're done.
Yeah. One of the things that we've talked about a lot here on the Reading with Your Kids podcast is, the value of reading with our kids and reading stories with our kids. There's immense value with that. But there's also a lot of value telling stories about our loved ones, as we've been talking about today, and not necessarily waiting and just doing it because someone has passed, but just picking up the photo album and sitting down and, my son met my grandmother, but she was only 6 months when she passed, and both my son and I were with her when she passed. And so that was a real blessing. My daughter never had a chance to meet my grandmother, but she could tell you all about her because she was so close to me. We've been telling stories about Nana with everybody. And, so I think if you ask my daughter, she would be able to tell you, oh, she liked this. And she used to like to go to the professional wrestling matches with my dad and ride on his motorcycle. And she was kind of weird and went to speakeasies and, and just that whole, so, she is alive. And I think there's the real value in telling those stories. Even when it's difficult, I think parents should make the stand and go for it and share those stories.
And there's vantage points that can be shared. Again, if you're creating a platform, sometimes it's new memories. So you have a memory, I have a memory, and then somebody else sees a memory. And now all of a sudden, your world is even more expanded in the love and the opportunities that you have to remember your loved ones because of the stories that are shared. I had one person in the back of the book, there's a couple pages that are lined that say memories. And then there are pages that are blank. And I had one person tell me that they sent Heaven's Bell around to family members. Children drew pictures. People wrote messages and memories. And then it was it was her grandmother about the grandfather. And so now Heaven's Bell has these memories and these perspectives that are probably even new for the grandma. And everybody was able to share their memories and their love, especially in the COVID environment. Yeah. But it could be long distance too.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's such an interesting story of how you became, you're a very successful businesswoman. And I'm imagining that you never dreamt of, writing a children's book. And I'm curious now that Heaven's Bell is out there and it's made a difference in folks' lives and you're getting this feedback. Are you inspired to continue to write for this audience?
I am. I really am. It's beyond my wildest dreams that I would touch that people would even take a moment to tell me how the book touched them. So to think that maybe there's an opportunity to tell more stories and help people. I was raised by a nurse, and I always thought, I loved her career because she helped people. She was very caring and she helped people. And, but I think storytelling can do that too. Mm-hmm. And it feels good. It feels good to help people, and I hope I'm creating some peace in the world. So yeah, it kind of eggs you on to maybe think about some other stories that might be meaningful. Yeah.
And, I know you've received a lot of feedback, but I don't know if you've ever had the time, I forget what the old saying was, for every letter that you receive about how great your product was, or about how terrible the experience was, there's probably 100 or 1,000 more people that are feeling the same way that never took the time to write. Do you ever think about the fact that in addition to all these messages you're getting, that there's hundreds, thousands of families that are reading Heaven's Bell and having these conversations?
No. It's so brand new for me, and I'm so green. You were kind enough to allow me to come on this podcast and take the time to talk with me. I'm incredibly grateful, and I just appreciate the opportunity to explore this. But no, I'm really excited and never thought about it that way.
Well, I want you to think about it that way, because I want every author to think about it, because being an author is hard. It's solitary. There's not a lot of feedback. It's not like me when I'm on stage and I make something disappear and I have 600 kids go, wow, and clap. You can write a great art, you write that great sentence and this is going to make such an impact, but no one's going to read it for a year or two or three.
It is one of the most courageous things I've done. And I consider myself, pretty confident. Mm-hmm. It was really scary.
Well,
and now I wouldn't change it for the world, but it was scary. Kind of put that out there and go, okay, here we go.
Here we go. Well, I know folks, I know folks are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about Heaven's Bell and also find out more about you. So where is the best place to connect?
Well, you can go to www.heavensbell.com or Sherrie at Heaven's Bell, and you can purchase Heaven's Bell on Amazon. And I believe now it's at Barnes & Noble, and Walmart picked it up. So just go online and type in Heaven's Bell, and I think you'll find it.
That's awesome. We've had a really fun time talking about Heaven's Bell. Not only talking about Heaven's Bell, this great new debut middle grade novel from our guest, but also talking about the really valuable conversations that this book can inspire. And we've been talking with the author, Sherrie Barch. Sherrie, thanks so much for being on the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We have three fantastic guests. Cheryl DeVega and Dave Gibson will be here to celebrate the book that they co-authored together. Dave is an award-winning songwriter. He's an amazing guy. Cheryl's an amazing talent in her own right. They'll be joined by Holly Heavaen. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. If you are the author of a fantastic children's book, you want to check out our Certified Great Read program. We have a panel of educators, parents, and kids, and if they believe that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a Certified Great Read. And with that status comes a whole lot of great promotional tours that can help your book really stand out from the crowd of books, the thousands of books that are published every single month. Earlier today, you heard that Christina in Wisconsin won herself a copy of Sherrie Barch's book, Heaven's Bell. That is one of the promotional tours that comes with it, a great giveaway that's promoted to our 60,000 plus social media followers. You can learn more about this program by going to CertifiedGreatRead.com or going to our website, ReadingWithYourKids.com, clicking on the author's Click Here button at the top of the page, scrolling on down to Certified Great Read. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, want to start by thanking our guest, Sherrie Barch. Be sure to get your copy of Heaven's Bell. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Alexia Brown. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. I want to thank Augie the doggy for having my back here in the studio. Most of all, we all want to come together to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.